The string lights blinked softly across the backyard like stars we could control, warm yellow glows that made even the plastic chairs look intentional. The scent of grilled food mingled with vanilla frosting from the cake Rachel insisted on ordering custom, and for a moment, I let myself believe it was real. This joy, this gathering, this version of my life that felt pulled from a home decor catalog. I wore the dress Ethan once said made me look unbothered in the best way, paired with heels I hadn't dared to touch since our 10th anniversary, and people kept complimenting my glow, not knowing it came from sheer exhaustion wrapped in civility. Everyone I loved, or used to love, was there. My sister from Chicago, coworkers I hadn't seen in months, even Ethan's boss and his wife, who brought wine I couldn't pronounce. I'd spent 3 weeks planning this night because I needed something to feel celebratory again. Something to remind me that turning 40 didn't mean fading into the background. I didn't expect balloons and speeches. I just wanted peace, a little recognition, maybe even a dance under the fairy lights. But instead, my husband handed me a manila envelope, sealed and stiff, with my name typed across the front in courier font like a bad script. "Happy birthday," he said with a smirk that didn't touch his eyes. And every sound around me, clinking glasses, laughter, the beginning notes of the next song, flattened into static. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, the weight of it foreign and suddenly unbearable. My fingers traced the corner. My voice stuck in my throat like I'd swallowed a stone. "What is this?" I asked, and he leaned in, lowered his voice like it was some private joke between us. "It's a fresh start. You'll thank me later." He kissed my cheek and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in front of the gift table with a 1,000-watt smile frozen on my face and a dozen eyes darting between their drinks and my expression. I could hear Rachel's heels before I saw her. She touched my arm lightly. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded automatically, like muscle memory from years of pretending. "Just something from Ethan," I said, tucking the envelope under my arm like it was an invoice. But when I looked back at the table, he was already laughing with a colleague, champagne in hand, like nothing had shifted, like our marriage hadn't just exploded in the middle of my milestone party. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub to open it. Divorce papers, clean, precise, like he'd had a lawyer waiting for my birthday to roll around. The signature line was already filled in with his sprawling cursive. No note, no explanation, just a clean exit wound. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stared at the form, at the blank line where I was supposed to agree that this was over, that this was how it ended. And the strangest thing happened. I laughed, quietly, bitterly, because in that moment I realized something he hadn't. He gave me an ending, which meant I was now free to write the finale. And oh, I was gonna write it well. I flushed the toilet out of habit, checked my lipstick in the mirror, and stepped back into the party like nothing had happened. The night was far from over. But the real show? It was just beginning. The party carried on as if the sky hadn't fallen into my lap, as if the woman of the hour wasn't holding legal proof that her marriage had been turned into an expiration date behind her back. I smiled for pictures. I nodded through toasts. I let Ethan's mother hug me and whisper something about aging with grace, as if that were the highest compliment a woman over 35 could hope to receive. All the while, the envelope stayed tucked behind a stack of cards in my purse, untouched, but humming like a landmine waiting to go off. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Something in me had cracked open, not broken, just split wide enough to let something sharper through. My marriage hadn't died that night. It had died slowly, like a leak beneath the floorboards. And this was just the first time someone had turned on the lights and said, I'd been waiting for Ethan to choose me again, to fight for us. But what he chose was convenience, clean paperwork, control. That night I didn't go to bed in tears. I stayed up until sunrise with my laptop, digging through archives, contracts, and shared accounts, pieces of a life we had supposedly built together. I didn't just find passwords, I found patterns, purchases made in advance, legal appointments booked weeks before my birthday. Evidence that this wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, preloaded. The cruelty wasn't in the act, it was in the timing. Ethan wanted to humiliate me, but politely, publicly, yet plausibly deniable. Just a formality, he'd probably say if asked. We'd been drifting apart, but I wasn't going to let my life be narrated by a man who timed his divorce for cake and confetti. I opened a document titled Gifts and started typing, not gifts received, but gifts returned. Every moment I gave him patience when he deserved silence. Every time I backed down to keep the peace. Every year I planned his birthday when he forgot mine. I made a list not out of pettiness, but precision. Because if I was going to give him a gift, it would be one he never forgot. Not wrapped in ribbon, but sealed with truth. That week, I canceled our joint anniversary trip without saying a word. I rerouted the refundable portion into an account he didn't know I had. I began untangling my name from every joint asset we once shared. House utilities, subscriptions, the gym membership, he never used but I always paid for. Every small step was a reclamation, not just of money, but of presence, of value. At work, I started arriving earlier, speaking up more in meetings. There was a quiet power in no longer waiting for someone's approval, especially when they'd already dismissed you with paperwork. My coworkers noticed. "You look different," one said. I smiled. "I am." I didn't tell them that the difference was divorce papers. I didn't tell them that I'd stopped asking questions like why me and started asking what now. Ethan, meanwhile, carried on like a man who believed he'd already won. I let him. I answered his text with one-liners. I accepted the terms of temporary silence. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't ignoring him. I was preparing. Because the best revenge isn't loud, it's strategic, and I had just begun drafting a gift of my own. Not a reaction, a reveal. And when the time came, it wouldn't be Ethan's signature the room remembered. It would be mine. The next morning, Ethan sent me flowers, tulips, my least favorite, a gesture that said, oops, more than, I'm sorry. The card was unsigned, the delivery automated. I didn't bother texting him back, not out of spite, but because I already knew what was coming. He had underestimated me. Again. He thought the most I'd do was cry into a pillow and maybe call a lawyer with shaky hands. But what he'd forgotten was that in the early years of our marriage, before his startup took off, and before I stopped being invited to board meetings I helped fund, I was the one who filed the incorporation paperwork. I was the one who wrote the first press release. I was the one who built the investor pipeline using my old contacts from business school. Ethan didn't marry a shadow. He married his infrastructure, and he'd just served his CFO divorce papers at her own birthday dinner. I logged into the old admin portal of his company, the one he thought I had forgotten about. I didn't touch anything, just looked, watched, traced the shape of the empire we once built side by side. Then I pulled out a folder from the back of my filing cabinet labeled Prenup. It had always been a joke between us. "We'll never need it," he'd said. "It's just to make my parents feel better." But I made sure to have it reviewed anyway. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I trusted myself. And what I found in that prenup, now a decade old, was something I'd insisted on adding. A clause stating that any asset developed using joint intellectual contribution and joint financing would be equally shared in the event of divorce, regardless of ownership designation. Ethan had signed it like a man who thought paperwork was beneath him. But paper remembers. And now, so did I. I didn't tell anyone what I found, not even my best friend. I didn't call a lawyer right away. I needed to build my case in silence. Ethan was already spinning his story, casually leaking the amicable separation narrative to mutuals, softening the blow. He thought he'd rewritten the script, but he had forgotten who used to write the scripts in the first place. I had emails. I had calendar logs. I had time-stamped drafts. And I had patience. Because this wasn't about getting even, it was about reminding the man who replaced me, with a legal envelope, that I was never optional. I was foundational. That Friday, I accepted an invitation to a tech mixer I would have normally skipped. I wore red, not because it was symbolic, but because Ethan hated the color. Too loud, he used to say, but that night I needed loud. Not in voice, but in presence. I didn't pitch. I didn't chase. I simply existed with a clarity he had spent years dimming. A VC I once connected with back in the early days recognized me. "Didn't you help launch Streamforge?" he asked. I smiled. "Helped?" I built the first 5 decks. His eyes widened. We should talk. By the end of the night, I wasn't just someone's soon-to-be ex-wife. I was a woman reclaiming her ledger. I didn't mention Ethan. I didn't need to. What mattered now wasn't the man who left me in front of a tiered cake. It was the woman standing in front of a blank page, holding every receipt, because he forgot the vows. But I remembered the papers. And unlike him, I read the fine print. The next week, Ethan's lawyer emailed me a draft of the asset division proposal, patronizing in tone, dismissive in content, and insulting in the numbers. They'd calculated my worth down to a percentage, single digits tucked into a spreadsheet, like I'd been a temporary contractor in the house I helped design. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, the kind that makes men like Ethan uncomfortable. Meanwhile, I assembled a portfolio of my contributions, not just receipts and documentation, but results. A side-by-side comparison, investments secured before my exit, drop in user engagement after. Performance metrics don't lie. But Ethan always assumed I wouldn't speak in data. That was his mistake. Because while he chased vision, I held infrastructure. He forgot that the system was mine too. At brunch with some old college friends, the whispers had already started. Did you hear what happened at her birthday? I heard he filed right there at the table. She just sat there. But they didn't know what sitting quiet really meant. They didn't know that silence wasn't surrender. It was the wind up. And I was only just getting started. Ethan sent another email, then a third. Still no reply from me. Instead, I sent my own message, not to him, but to the board of his company, a formal notice citing my foundational contributions, my equity clause, and my intent to exercise my legal rights as co-architect of the product roadmap. I didn't demand. I documented. I included links, timestamps, attachments, and one quiet sentence. Please be advised, this is not a request. It wasn't petty, it was precise. That evening I went to a gallery opening, my own, hosted under a pseudonym I'd used when I first started painting again. My work had been picked up by a small collective that appreciated art born of precision and restraint. One of the curators leaned over to me and said, "There's power in pieces that don't beg to be noticed." I smiled, thinking about all the years I edited Ethan's press kits while letting my own achievements collect dust. He never once asked what I wanted, just assumed my version of success was a reflection of his. But the truth is, I had designs of my own, on canvas, on code, on legacy. The day before our mediation meeting, I walked into a boutique investment firm I'd quietly joined as a strategic advisor months before Ethan filed. I didn't need his company. I had already been building my own lane. The managing partner greeted me like a founder, not a footnote. He showed me an early-stage startup struggling with platform scaling. "Could use a mind like yours," he said. I flipped through their deck, marked up some key metrics, and handed it back. "Let me know when they're ready to pivot." He nodded, impressed. I didn't mention Ethan. Why would I? The story had already moved on, and so had I. That night I looked back at the cake photo from the party, the one with the pink peonies and glitter candles. Everyone else had been looking at the sparkler on top. But I remembered. Designing that cake myself. I remembered choosing the layers, the flavor, the structure. Just like I remembered designing the business, the pitch decks, the foundations of a company he now claimed as his alone. He could keep the party, the cake, the headlines. But I had designed something far more lasting. I had designed my exit. And it was layered, deliberate, and deliciously final. By the time the mediation date arrived, Ethan was brimming with the smug confidence of a man who thought he still held the narrative in his hands. His lawyer arrived in an expensive suit and laid out their offer with an air of reluctant generosity, as if they were handing down a favor from a great height. But when I walked in, calm, prepared, and not even slightly rattled, that energy shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I simply opened my folder, thick with annotated records, emails forwarded to a secure address, original architecture drafts, and screenshots with time-stamped IP logs from the early days of our shared company. Every document told the same story. I hadn't just supported the foundation. I was the foundation. The mediator, a sharp woman with eyes like glass cutters, skimmed the first few pages and paused. "Did you co-author the system design?" Ethan's lawyer stammered something about shared contributions, about blurred lines, but I slid the patent filing forward, the one that listed me as co-inventor. Ethan paled. "It was always our plan to credit her," his lawyer muttered. I turned, cool and steady. Funny how quickly plans change when you think someone won't speak. Ethan didn't meet my eyes. He kept scanning the papers, desperate to find a version of events that put him back in control. But that version no longer existed. When the mediator proposed a revised settlement based on actual contribution value, Ethan's voice rose in protest. "This is her trying to humiliate me." I leaned forward, soft but firm. "No, this is me documenting what happened." There was no rage in my tone, just truth. And the thing about truth is, it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand long enough to be seen. The room fell quiet. The offer was adjusted. The tone was different now. His lawyer flipped the last page, looked at Ethan, then said nothing. There was nothing left to argue. I left the meeting with terms that didn't just reflect fairness. They reflected facts. Not revenge, not aggression. Just the paper trail they never thought I had the patience to collect. Outside the office building, I stepped into the sun like someone who had just laid down the final piece of a puzzle only she knew existed. My phone buzzed. A former investor from our early seed round. "Heard what happened," the message read. "I always knew you were the real engine. Let's talk." I didn't reply immediately. I wanted the silence to feel like power. Because this time, it was that evening, I lit the last birthday candle left from the party. I watched the flame flicker, then pressed it gently into a blank journal page. A wax seal for a new beginning. I didn't need confetti or applause. Just a clear desk, a locked-in lawyer, and the kind of confidence that doesn't come from being loud, but from being undeniable. Ethan thought the papers he served me were the end of a story, but they were just the prologue. The real story was the one I'd been quietly writing in margins and source code all along. And now it was time to publish it. The finalized settlement arrived in my inbox on a Thursday morning, neatly packaged and stamped with digital signatures. I didn't rush to open it. I took my time, made coffee, sat on the balcony, let the weight of the moment settle into my bones like sunlight. Then I clicked. The payout figure was significant, but more important was the clause they tried to slip in quietly, an NDA that would have silenced my story. I smiled. Ethan still hadn't learned. I sent it back with one line: remove clause 14.7 or consider the deal void. An hour later, his lawyer called. "He's concerned about public image." "He should be," I said, and ended the call. They removed the clause. By the time the papers were officially filed, I had already begun production on a small video project with a creative team I'd quietly assembled. Not about Ethan, not about revenge, but about the silent architects, the women whose ideas launched companies, whose names were erased in footnotes, whose work was applauded in private but dismissed in public. It wasn't personal, it was systemic, and it was time we turned the lens around. The documentary was titled The Invisible Founder. I funded it with a portion of my settlement, not out of spite, but out of principle. Because sometimes the best gift isn't what you give someone else, it's what you give yourself. The right to be seen at the first screening. The room was full of people who had lived some version of my story. Creatives, engineers, consultants, daughters, wives, builders, survivors. One woman came up to me after the credits rolled, tears on her cheeks. "I saw myself in every line," she whispered. "Thank you for not staying silent." I nodded, my throat thick. That moment was worth more than any court-ordered check, because I hadn't just built a response to Ethan's betrayal. I'd built a mirror for every woman who had ever been told to wait her turn while someone else cashed in on her work. Meanwhile, Ethan's company was in flux. His product pipeline had stalled without me quietly fixing back-end errors. His board was nervous. A trade publication ran a feature titled, "Can Vision Survive Without Infrastructure?" and quoted anonymous sources questioning the real origins of the platform. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The truth was doing fine on its own. The same people who once dismissed my input were now reaching out, asking to collaborate. Not as a footnote, not as a favor, as a leader. I took only the meetings that aligned with my values. The rest I'd politely declined, because I'd learned something invaluable through the process. Freedom isn't just walking away. It's walking into something better without dragging old battles behind you. The same day the divorce was finalized, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a card in Ethan's handwriting. "You win," it said. I tossed it in the trash without reading further. Because it was never about winning, it was about reclaiming the authorship of my life. The party was over. The noise had faded. But the stage was finally mine. And this time, I wasn't waiting for a cue. I was writing the script, directing the scene, producing the outcome, one frame at a time. The launch event wasn't supposed to be poetic, but it turned out that way anyway. A year to the day after Ethan handed me divorce papers in front of our friends, I stood center stage at a private venue in the city, beneath soft lighting, with over 100 founders, creatives, engineers, and media professionals watching. They weren't here for gossip. They weren't here for closure. They were here for the platform, my platform, the one I'd spent the last 12 months building in stealth with the team I'd handpicked after I walked away from everything. The name of the platform? Sella. It means pause, reflect. It means we stop letting other people dictate what our success should look like and start building spaces where ownership isn't a privilege, it's the baseline. I stood behind the podium, not to perform, but to present. No flashy intro, no overproduced reel, just a walkthrough of a product that didn't erase its builders, a system that remembered who made it, that kept receipts, that learned from silence, but didn't live in it. As I finished my keynote and the crowd stood in applause, I caught the flash of a phone being raised at the back. Someone was filming. And not just anyone. Ethan. He'd shown up uninvited, wearing the same smug face he used to wear at investor dinners, except this time there was something else in his expression, something like disbelief, something like regret. He hadn't expected me to come back bigger, stronger, visible. I didn't flinch. I looked right at him and nodded once, an acknowledgement, not of him but of what he represented. Every dismissal, every gaslight, every quiet theft behind closed doors. That nod said, I see it. I survived it, and I turned it into fuel. After the presentation, a young woman named Tessa from a rising VC firm approached me. Your product demo was incredible, she said, but it's your clarity that's the real innovation. You don't just sell a system, you stand for something. I smiled, thanked her, and told her the truth. It's easy to be clear when you've had everything stripped away. What's left is what matters. Her firm signed a partnership agreement with Sela 2 weeks later. Meanwhile, a small clip from the event, me standing at the podium, speaking a single sentence, started circulating online. You don't have to burn it all down to reclaim it. You just have to build something they can't ignore. Within 72 hours, the quote was everywhere. Tech blogs, leadership newsletters, Instagram captions from women I'd never met. Ethan tried to issue a vague public statement about joint innovation and shared growth, but no one was listening. The narrative had moved on. I wasn't his ex-wife anymore. I was a founder with a product on track to revolutionize digital governance in startup ecosystems, and his role in that story? Footnote. If that, as I reviewed feedback from the event with my team that Friday, Rachel leaned over and said, I still can't believe he showed up. I shrugged. He needed to see it. I said, the thing he tried to control, now thriving without him. She grinned. You gave him the ultimate gift. I laughed once. What, public accountability? No, she said. A front row seat to the one thing he never expected. Your freedom. And she was right. That night, I posted a single clip from the event. No caption, just me at the mic looking directly into the crowd saying, the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman like me is underestimate her. The video reached 500,000 views by morning. The masterpiece had been painted, and I was just getting started. The morning after the launch, I moved slowly, barefoot, coffee in hand, watching sunlight hit the table where the divorce papers once sat like a warning. But I didn't feel anger, just distance. She, the version of me who got blindsided, had already done what needed to be done. She turned betrayal into blueprint. She let the work speak louder than the noise. Later, Ethan texted me, 2 words. You won. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The real closure had already happened, on stage, in code, and across every headline. That evening, a young developer at a round table asked what I wished I'd known starting out. I said, "You don't need permission to lead. Silence isn't weakness, it's leverage." She hugged me. "Thank you for making the exit look like a beginning." And that's when I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. Not the kind that gets printed on plaques, but the kind that gets passed down in courage. I left with no spotlight, just my keys and clarity. The skyline glowed above me, systems running on what I built. The gift I gave him wasn't about spectacle. It was about taking back what was mine. If you've ever been betrayed in your moment of joy, know this: you can rebuild. You can rise. Not just loud, but undeniable. I'm the woman who got divorce papers at her birthday party, and I walked out owning the whole table. If this story made you feel seen, drop a comment, share your truth, and hit subscribe. Because we don't just recover, we broadcast it.